The certified letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, demanding $47,000 for pool maintenance fees. The problem? Marcus had filled in his pool 3 years ago. But when HOA President Karen Mitchell smirked at the hearing and said, "Pools don't just disappear, Mr. Chen," she had no idea she'd just declared war on a man who'd spent 15 years as a forensic accountant. By the time Marcus was done digging, Karen would wish pools could disappear along with her reputation, her position, and her. Marcus Chen stood in his kitchen, still in his pajamas, staring at the certified letter that had just shattered his peaceful Tuesday morning. The Willowbrook Estates Homeowners Association letterhead gleamed at the top of the page, and beneath it, words that made his coffee grow cold in his hands. Notice of delinquent fees, pool maintenance assessment, $47,000, outstanding balance. He read it again. Then a third time. The numbers didn't change. $47,000, he whispered to his empty kitchen. For a pool that doesn't exist. The letter was signed by Karen Mitchell, HOA president, in her characteristic purple ink, the same purple she used to leave passive-aggressive notes about, garbage can placement, and slightly overgrown hedges. Marcus had dealt with Karen's petty tyranny for years, but this crossed every line he thought existed. He walked to his back door and stepped onto the deck, looking out at his beautifully landscaped backyard, where his pool had once been. A Japanese garden now flourished. Koi swam in a small pond surrounded by carefully placed stones and ornamental grasses. The transformation had taken months of work and cost him nearly $20,000 3 years ago. His phone buzzed. A text from his neighbor, Janet Rodriguez. "Did you get the pool bill too?" "This is insane." Marcus speed dialed her number. Janet picked up on the first ring. "Marcus, thank God. Please tell me you got the same ridiculous letter." $47,000, Marcus said. "Janet, I filled in my pool in 2022. You were there for the construction. You brought me lemonade while the crews worked." "I know. I told them that when they called last week. The woman on the phone, I think it was Karen herself, told me I was mistaken about the timeline and that all properties with pools were subject to the new assessment regardless of current pool status." Marcus felt his jaw clench. Regardless of current pool status. What kind of legal nonsense is that? "The kind that makes me want to move out of this neighborhood," Janet said. "But Marcus, there's something else. I talked to the Hendersons. On Maple Street, they got charged for a tennis court. They don't have a tennis court." "Exactly. They have a vegetable garden where their tennis court used to be." Removed it in 2019, Marcus sank into one of his patio chairs, the letter still clutched in his hand. A pattern was emerging, and he didn't like what he was seeing. "Janet, how many people do you think got these letters?" "I'm guessing everyone. Whoever had an amenity, even if they don't anymore." "That's fraud." "That's what I thought too. But what can we do? Most people can't afford to fight the HOA legally. They have deeper pockets than any of us individually." Marcus stared at his koi pond, watching the fish glide silently through the water. In his 15 years as a forensic accountant, he'd investigated embezzlement schemes, tax fraud, and financial manipulation that would make most people's heads spin. He'd testified in federal court against executives who thought they were untouchable. He'd unraveled webs of deceit that had taken years to construct. And Karen Mitchell thought she could intimidate him with bad math and purple ink. "Janet," he said quietly, "I need you to do me a favor. Can you find out exactly who got these letters? Names, amounts, what they're being charged for? Why? Because 15 years of hunting financial criminals taught me something. When someone gets this bold, this sloppy, they're not just making one mistake, they're making dozens, and they always leave a trail." After hanging up with Janet, Marcus went to his home office and pulled out a thick folder labeled HOA Communications. He'd kept every letter, every notice, every meeting minute from the past 5 years. What had started as simple organization was about to become an arsenal. He spread the documents across his desk and began reading with the systematic precision that had made him one of the most feared forensic accountants in the state. Within 20 minutes, he'd found the first discrepancy, a budget report from 2023 that showed pool maintenance costs of $15,000 annually for the entire community. Now, Karen was claiming individual assessments that, if applied to every former pool owner, would total nearly $500,000. His doorbell rang. Marcus looked up to see a familiar figure through his front window, Karen Mitchell herself, standing on his porch in her trademark white capris and coral blouse, her platinum blonde hair perfectly styled despite the heat. Marcus opened the door but didn't invite her in. "Marcus," Karen said with her politician's smile, "I thought I'd stop by personally to discuss your pool assessment." "I know the amount might seem surprising. Surprising isn't the word I'd use," Marcus replied evenly. "Karen, I don't have a pool. According to our records, you do." She pulled out a manila folder. "Property assessments from 2019 clearly show a swimming pool on your lot. Property assessments from 2019 are irrelevant to charges in 2025. The pool was removed in 2022. Smile didn't waver, but something cold flickered in her eyes. "Marcus, I've been managing this community for 8 years. Pools don't just disappear. I drive by your house regularly, and I can see the pool area from the street. What you can see from the street is a Japanese garden. What I see is a pool, with some creative landscaping around it." Karen stepped closer, her voice dropping to what she probably thought was a reasonable tone. "Look, I understand this assessment is substantial, but pool maintenance costs have skyrocketed, and the board made the difficult decision to pass these costs directly to pool owners. It's only fair." Marcus felt something shift inside him, the same cold clarity that had always settled over him. When he'd found the smoking gun in a financial investigation, Karen wasn't just wrong, she was lying, and she was lying badly. "Karen," he said, his voice deadly quiet, "are you telling me that you personally believe there is currently a functioning swimming pool in my backyard?" "I'm telling you that our records show a pool and our landscaping restrictions prohibit the removal of major amenities without board approval, which was never requested. Board approval was requested in January 2022. It was granted in March 2022. The removal was completed in September 2022. I have all the documentation." For the first time, Karen's composure cracked slightly. I don't recall that application. Would you like me to get the copies? Including your signature on the approval." Karen's laugh was brittle. "Marcus, I think there's been some confusion. Why don't you come to Thursday's board meeting? We can sort this all out in a civilized manner." "Oh, I'll be there," Marcus said. "And Karen, I'll be bringing documentation. Lots of it." After Karen left, Marcus returned to his office and opened his laptop. If Karen wanted to play games with paperwork and documentation, she'd picked the wrong opponent. He'd spent his career following money trails that criminals thought they'd buried beyond discovery. But this time, it wasn't just about the money. This time, it was personal. He started with the HOA's financial records, which were legally required to be available to homeowners upon request. A quick email to the management company would get him copies of the last 3 years' worth of budgets, expenses, and board meeting minutes. Then he'd start making phone calls. Every homeowner who'd received one of these fraudulent assessments, every contractor who'd worked with the HOA, every vendor who'd submitted bills for community maintenance. Marcus had learned long ago that financial crimes were like icebergs. The visible part was always just the beginning. If Karen was bold enough to charge residents for amenities that didn't exist, what else was she hiding? His phone rang. The caller ID showed Janet's number. "I've got names," she said without preamble. 14 households got letters. Pool charges, tennis court charges. Even one family charged for a gazebo they tore down in 2020. "Marcus, the total is over $600,000. Marcus felt his pulse quicken. $600,000 in fraudulent charges. If they're fraudulent— "Oh, they're fraudulent," Marcus said, looking out at his koi pond. "Janet, I need you to spread the word. Tell everyone who got these letters to come to Thursday's board meeting. Tell them to bring their documentation. Tell them to bring their checkbooks too, their checkbooks. Not to pay the HOA," Marcus said with grim satisfaction. "To pay their share of the legal fees when we sue Karen Mitchell and the entire board for fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, and whatever other charges I can dig up in the next 48 hours. As he hung up the phone, Marcus felt the familiar thrill of the hunt beginning. Karen Mitchell had no idea what she'd just awakened. She thought she was dealing with just another frustrated homeowner who'd grumble and eventually pay up. Instead, she'd just declared war on someone who'd made a career out of destroying people exactly like her. The koi in his backyard pond swam in peaceful circles, oblivious to the storm that was about to engulf Willowbrook Estates. By Thursday night, Marcus thought Karen Mitchell was going to learn that some fish were much bigger and far more dangerous. By Wednesday morning, Marcus had transformed his home office into a war room. 3 monitors displayed spreadsheets, legal documents, and email chains. Stacks of printed HOA records covered every available surface. He'd barely slept, surviving on coffee and the kind of focused intensity that had once helped him uncover a $12 million embezzlement scheme hidden in a nonprofit's disaster relief fund. What he'd found in just 36 hours made that case look like petty theft. His doorbell rang at 8:47 a.m. Through the window, he saw Janet Rodriguez holding a banker's box, her expression grim. "You're not going to believe what I found," she said the moment he opened the door. "Try me. I've been up since 4 a.m. discovering that our HOA president has been running a criminal enterprise." Janet set the box on his kitchen counter. "Remember how I said I'd talk to everyone who got assessment letters? Well, Mrs. Patterson on Oak Street is 83 years old. She got a bill for $22,000 for tennis court maintenance. She doesn't have a tennis court. She never had a tennis court. Her lot isn't even big enough for one. But Marcus, here's the thing she paid it." Marcus felt his stomach drop. She paid $22,000. Last month, she took out a reverse mortgage on her house because she was afraid the HOA would foreclose on her. Janet's voice cracked. She's lived in that house for 40 years. She was terrified of losing it. The coffee in Marcus's mouth suddenly tasted bitter. He'd been thinking of this as a David on Goliath financial battle, a chance to use his skills against someone who'd finally picked the wrong target. He hadn't considered the victims who wouldn't or couldn't fight back. "There's more," Janet continued, opening the box. "The Washingtons on Elm Street paid $15,000 for pool maintenance. On a pool they filled in during the 2019 drought. The Kowalskis paid $18,000 for a hot tub they removed when their daughter was diagnosed with epilepsy. The doctor said it was a safety hazard." Marcus stared at the stack of canceled checks and bank statements Janet had compiled. How many people have paid these fraudulent assessments? So far, 7 families, total of about $130,000. Jesus Christ. Marcus ran his hands through his hair. "Janet, this isn't just fraud. This is elder abuse. This is extortion." His phone buzzed with an email notification. Marcus glanced at the screen and saw a response from the HOA management company, Prestige Community Services. He'd requested 3 years of financial records the day before. "We regret to inform you that the requested financial documents are currently unavailable due to system maintenance. Please contact HOA President Karen Mitchell directly for any financial inquiries." Marcus read the email twice, then looked up at Janet. "They're stonewalling me. What does that mean?" "It means Karen knows I'm coming for her, and she's trying." To cover her tracks, Marcus was already moving toward his office. "But she made a mistake. She doesn't know that I've already got what I need." He pulled up a spreadsheet on his main monitor. "Look at this. HOA dues for our community are $150 per month per household. There are 247 homes in Willowbrook Estates. That's $444,600 per year. In regular assessments," Janet peered at the screen. "That seems about right. Now look at the expenses they reported for 2024. Marcus highlighted a series of entries. Landscaping, $89,000. Snow removal, $34,000. Administrative costs, $67,000. Pool maintenance, $15,000. Total reported expenses, $205,000. So they had a surplus of almost $240,000. According to their own reports, yes. But here's where it gets interesting. Marcus switched to another screen. I pulled the contracts with their actual service providers. Real landscaping costs, $31,000. Real snow removal, $18,000. Real administrative costs from the management company, $22,000. Janet was quiet for a moment, then whistled low. So they've been padding the expenses. Padding doesn't begin to cover it. They've been inflating costs by 300 to 400%, then pocketing the difference. And that's just 2024. I'm finding similar patterns going back to 2019. Marcus pulled up another document. But the special assessments for non-amenities, that's new, started 6 months ago. right after Karen was re-elected for another 2-year term. How much money are we talking about, total? Marcus had been dreading this calculation, but he'd run the numbers 3 times to make sure. Conservative estimate, over the past 5 years, Karen and whoever else is involved have stolen approximately $1.2 million from this community. Janet sank into a chair. That's everyone's life savings. That's retirement funds, college funds. That's Mrs. Patterson taking out a reverse mortgage at 83 years old because she was terrified of losing her home. Phone rang. The caller ID showed a number he didn't recognize. Mr. Chen. This is Detective Ray Holbrook with the Financial Crimes Unit. I understand you've been asking questions about HOA financial irregularities. Marcus felt his pulse quicken. Detective, I wasn't aware the police were already investigating. We weren't until about an hour ago. Your neighbor, Janet Rodriguez, filed a complaint alleging fraud and elder abuse. She listed you as someone with relevant financial expertise. Marcus looked at Janet, who gave him a small nod. Detective, I think what we're looking at here is significantly larger than a simple HOA dispute. That's what I'm hoping to determine. Would you be available to meet this afternoon? I'd like to review whatever documentation you've compiled. Absolutely. Detective, you should know there's a board meeting tomorrow night. I suspect there are going to be some very uncomfortable questions asked. Mr. Chen, if your preliminary findings are accurate, I'd strongly advise you not to confront the suspects before we've completed our investigation. These situations can escalate quickly. I understand your concern, Detective, but there are residents who've already paid these fraudulent assessments. Some of them are elderly, on fixed incomes. Every day this continues, more people could be victimized. After hanging up with Detective Holbrook, Marcus turned to Janet. You called the police. I called them when I saw Mrs. Patterson's bank statements. Marcus, she's eating cat food for dinner because she spent her grocery money on that reverse mortgage payment. Marcus felt something cold and hard settle in his chest. He'd spent his career chasing white-collar criminals who stole from pension funds and charity organizations, but it had always been abstract numbers on spreadsheets. Distant victims he never met. Mrs. Patterson lived 3 streets over. He'd helped her carry groceries to her car at the supermarket just last month. Janet, I need you to do something for me. Call everyone you can reach who got these assessment letters. Tell them not to pay anything else to the HOA without consulting a lawyer first, and tell them about tomorrow night's meeting. What are you going to do? Marcus looked at his screens full of evidence. Then at the box of documents Janet had brought showing the human cost of Karen's greed. When he spoke, his voice was quiet, but filled with a kind of certainty that had once made opposing attorneys very nervous. I'm going to make sure Karen Mitchell never steals from anyone ever again. That afternoon, Detective Holbrook turned out to be a thin, methodical man in his 50s, who reminded Marcus of the best federal investigators he'd worked with. Patient, thorough, and absolutely relentless once they caught a scent. They spent 3 hours in Marcus's office, going through every document, every spreadsheet, every timeline Marcus had constructed. Holbrook asked sharp questions and took detailed notes, occasionally requesting copies of specific documents. Mr. Chen, in your professional opinion, what we're looking at here is this systematic fraud. Detective, in my professional opinion, this is one of the most brazen theft schemes I've encountered. And I've testified against people who embezzled millions from federal disaster relief funds. What's your assessment of the total scope? Marcus pulled up his master spreadsheet. Based on the documentation I've been able to compile, I estimate Karen Mitchell and potentially other board members have stolen approximately $1.2 million over 5 years through inflated service contracts and fictitious expenses. The recent assessments for non-existent amenities represent a new escalation in another $130,000 in documented theft just in the past 6 months. And you believe there are more victims who haven't come forward? I'm certain of it. These people targeted the most vulnerable residents, first elderly homeowners, people on fixed incomes, anyone they thought wouldn't or couldn't fight back. Detective Holbrook closed his notebook. Mr. Chen, I need to ask you to postpone tomorrow night's confrontation. Give me 48 hours to execute search warrants and secure the financial records before they can be destroyed. Detective, with respect, Karen already knows someone's asking questions. If we wait, she might disappear the evidence entirely. What are you suggesting? Thursday evening arrived with a kind of oppressive humidity that made the air feel thick and electric, as if the weather itself sensed the storm about to break over Willowbrook Estates. Marcus stood in his bathroom, adjusting his tainavi, blue with silver pinstripes, the same one he'd worn when testifying against the CEO of Meridian Financial. Tonight, Karen Mitchell would join that CEO in a very exclusive club, white-collar criminals who'd underestimated Marcus Chen. The Willowbrook Community Center was buzzing with an energy Marcus had never seen at an HOA meeting. Usually, these gatherings drew maybe 15 residents, mostly retirees with nothing better to do on a Thursday night. Tonight, cars filled the parking lot and spilled onto the street. Marcus parked his Honda Civic next to Karen's white BMW license plate. Hoprez felt a grim satisfaction at the symbolism. By the end of the evening, that vanity plate would be evidence in a criminal case. Inside, the meeting room was packed. Marcus counted at least 60 residents, many of whom he'd never seen at a community meeting. Janet Rodriguez caught his eye from the third row and nodded toward the back corner, where Detective Holbrook sat in plainclothes, a small recording device barely visible on the table in front of him. Karen Mitchell entered at exactly 7 p.m. Her coral blazer perfectly pressed, her platinum hair styled into its usual immaculate bob. She carried herself with the confident stride of someone who'd never faced serious opposition, scanning the crowded room with what Marcus recognized as barely concealed annoyance. "Good evening, everyone," Karen said, taking her place at the head table alongside the other board members' Vice President, Tom Bradley, Secretary Linda Walsh, and Treasurer Margaret Foster. "I see we have quite a turnout tonight. I do hope we can keep our discussions civil and productive." She shuffled through her papers with practiced efficiency. "Before we begin with the regular agenda, I understand some residents have concerns about recent special assessments. I'd like to address those concerns head-on, so there's no confusion about the board's fiscal responsibilities." Marcus felt his pulse quicken. Karen was walking directly into the trap. "As many of you know," Karen continued, her voice taking on the patronizing tone of someone explaining simple concepts to children, property maintenance costs have increased dramatically over the past few years. The board has worked tirelessly to absorb these increases through careful budget management. But some specialized maintenance requirements have forced us to implement targeted assessments. A hand shot up in the fourth row. Marcus recognized Bill Henderson, the man who'd been charged for a tennis court that no longer existed. "Karen, I got a bill for $28,000 for tennis court maintenance. I don't have a tennis court." Karen's smile never wavered. "Mr. Henderson, according to our property assessments, your lot includes recreational amenities that require ongoing maintenance. The fact that you may have altered the appearance of these amenities doesn't eliminate your responsibility for their upkeep. I didn't alter anything. I removed a cracked tennis court in 2019 and planted a vegetable garden. Our records show a tennis court, Mr. Henderson. If you made unauthorized modifications to your property, that's a separate issue the board will need to address." Marcus watched the room's energy shift. Murmurs rippled through the crowd as residents began to understand what they were hearing. Karen wasn't just defending the charges, she was doubling down on them. "Perfect." Another hand went up. Dorothy Patterson, 83 years old and looking frail in her flowered dress, struggled to her feet. "Mrs. Mitchell, I paid the $22,000 you said I owed for tennis court maintenance, but I've never had a tennis court. My yard isn't even big enough. Why did you make me pay for something that doesn't exist?" For the first time, Karen's composure cracked slightly. She'd clearly expected pushback from people who hadn't paid yet, not from someone who'd already been victimized. Mrs. Patterson, the board's assessment, was based on comprehensive property evaluations. "If you have concerns about your specific situation, perhaps we could discuss it privately after the meeting." "No?" The voice came from the back of the room, and every head turned. Marcus stood slowly, his expression calm but his eyes ice cold. "I think Mrs. Patterson's question deserves a public answer. In fact, I think this entire room deserves some answers." Karen's face flushed slightly. "Mr. Chen, there's a process for addressing grievances. If you'd like to be added to the agenda, I don't need to be added to the agenda." "Karen, I'm a homeowner in this community, and I have questions about how our money is being spent." Marcus walked to the front of the room, pulling out a thick folder. Behind him, he could hear Detective Holbrook's recorder capturing every word. "Let's start with something simple," Marcus said, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd testified in federal court. "Karen, can you tell us how much money the HOA collected in regular assessments last year? That information is available in our annual report, $444,600, Marcus said. "Now, can you tell us how much you reported spending on actual community maintenance?" Karen's jaw tightened. "Mr. Chen, if you have specific concerns about the budget, you can submit them in writing, $205,000, Marcus continued, "which means we had a surplus of almost $240,000. So my question is, where did that money go?" The room was dead silent now. Marcus could see Karen calculating, trying to determine how much he actually knew. "Community funds are managed according to state regulations and board oversight," she said carefully. "All expenditures are properly documented and approved through appropriate channels." "Are they?" Marcus opened his folder and pulled out a contract. "This is your landscaping contract with Green Acres Lawn Service. You reported paying them $8,000 last year for community maintenance." He held up another document. "This is the actual contract I obtained directly from Green Acres. They were paid $31,000. The murmur in the room grew louder. Marcus could see Karen's face going pale, but she wasn't backing down. "Mr. Chen, I don't know where you obtained that document, but I can assure you that our financial records are accurate and properly maintained." "So you're saying Green Acres is lying about how much you paid them?" "I'm saying that complex financial arrangements often involve multiple service providers and payment structures that may not be apparent to someone without proper context." Marcus smiled, and it was the smile of a predator who'd just heard his prey make a fatal mistake. "Karen, I've been a forensic accountant for 15 years. I've investigated financial fraud cases involving millions of dollars. I've testified in federal court against people who thought they were smarter than the system. So when you talk about complex financial arrangements, I know exactly what you mean." He pulled out another stack of documents. "You want to talk about complex arrangements? Let's talk about how you've been inflating service contracts by 300 to 400% and pocketing the difference. Let's talk about how you've stolen over $1 million from this community over the past 5 years. The room erupted. Voices rose from every corner as residents demanded answers, shouted questions, and began connecting dots they'd never seen before. Through the chaos, Marcus kept his eyes locked on Karen, watching her carefully controlled facade finally begin to crumble. That's a serious accusation," Karen stammered, her voice barely audible over the crowd. "I'll have to consult with our legal counsel, and let's talk about the special assessments," Marcus continued, his voice cutting through the noise. "Charging people for pools that don't exist, tennis courts that were removed years ago, gazebos that were torn down. You've been systematically targeting the most vulnerable residents in this community, knowing they couldn't or wouldn't fight back." Karen's face was now white as paper. She looked around the room desperately, as if searching for an escape route that didn't exist. "Mrs. Patterson," Marcus said, turning to the elderly woman, "did anyone from the HOA ever come to your property to verify whether you actually had a tennis court?" "No," Mrs. Patterson said, her voice stronger now. "Nobody ever came to look. They just sent me the bill and said I had to pay it or they'd put a lien on my house." Marcus turned back to Karen. "Did you ever personally verify the existence of amenities before charging residents for their maintenance?" Karen's mouth opened, but no words came out. She was trapped, and everyone in the room could see it. Tom Bradley, the vice president, cleared his throat nervously. "Perhaps we should table this discussion until we can review the relevant documentation more thoroughly." "No," said a voice from the middle of the room. Janet Rodriguez stood up, holding a manila folder. "I think we should review the documentation right now. I've been talking to residents all week, and I've found 7 families who paid these fraudulent assessments. 7 families who were billed out of over $130,000 for amenities that don't exist." She began reading names and amounts, her voice growing stronger with each entry. The Washingtons, $15,000 for pool maintenance on a pool that was filled. And during the drought, the Kowalskis, $18,000 for a hot tub they removed for their daughter's safety. Mrs. P. The Willowbrook Estates Community Center had never seen anything like the chaos that erupted after. Detective Holbrook placed Karen Mitchell under arrest. As the full scope of their victimization became clear, through it all, Marcus stood at the front of the room like the eye of a hurricane, watching Karen's carefully constructed world collapse in real time, called out, his voice cutting through the commotion. "I need everyone to remain calm. This is an ongoing investigation, and we'll need statements from anyone who received fraudulent assessments or has information about HOA financial irregularities." Karen sat in her chair, handcuffed and staring at the table, her coral blazer, now wrinkled, and her perfect hair disheveled. The transformation was remarkable less than an hour ago. She'd walked into this room as the unchallenged queen of Willowbrook Estates. Now she looked like what she was, a common criminal caught in the act. Tom Bradley, the vice president, stood uncertainly beside his chair. "Detective, I want to make it clear that the rest of the board had no knowledge of any financial irregularities. We trusted Karen to handle the community's finances." "Mr. Bradley," Detective Holbrook interrupted, "you'll have an opportunity to provide your statement during our formal investigation." Stepped forward. "Detective, before you take her into custody, there's something else the community needs to know." Holbrook nodded. "Go ahead, Mr. Chen." Marcus turned to face the room, his expression grim. "The financial fraud we've uncovered tonight is just the beginning." For the first time since being arrested, her eyes flashing with a mixture of fear and defiance. "I don't know what you're talking about, really." "Let's talk about Prestige Community Services, the management company that handles our HOA administration." He opened the folder and extracted a business registration document. Prestige Community Services, LLC. Incorporated in Delaware 3. Years ago, owner Catherine M. Johnson. The room was silent, waiting. Catherine M. Johnson, Marcus continued, whose legal name, according to public records, is Catherine Mitchell Johnson. Karen Mitchell's maiden name was Catherine Johnson. The gasp that went through the room was audible. Karen's face went completely white. "You own the management company," Marcus said, his voice deadly quiet. "You've been paying yourself administrative fees from both sides. The HOA pays Prestige Community Services $67,000 a year in management fees." Detective Holbrook leaned forward. "Mrs. Mitchell, is this accurate?" Karen's lawyer training kicked in, even in handcuffs. "I invoke my right to remain silent." "That's fine," Marcus said. "Just manage Willowbrook Estates. They manage 17 other HOAs across 3 counties." Marcus pulled out another stack of documents, all reporting the same pattern of inflated expenses and mysterious special assessments. The room erupted again. Janet Rodriguez stood up, her face flushed with anger. "Janet, I spent the last 2 days calling every HOA that Prestige manages. Service contracts inflated by hundreds of %, and a management company that stonewalls any requests for financial records." Marcus turned back to Karen. "How many communities have you been stealing from, Karen? How many Mrs. Pattersons are out there eating cat food because they paid your fraudulent assessments? You don't understand," she said, her voice breaking. "The costs were real. Inflation, labor shortages, insurance premiums, everything was getting more expensive. By stealing over $2 million across 17 communities," Marcus's voice was East Gold. "By targeting elderly residents who couldn't fight back. By making up charges for amenities that don't exist. It started small, just smoothing out cash flow issues. But then the expenses kept rising, and the residents kept complaining about dues increases. And I—" "You what?" Marcus demanded. "I thought I could manage it. Mrs. Mitchell, I think we've heard enough for tonight. You're under arrest for fraud, embezzlement, and theft. We'll be executing search warrants on your home, your business, and all associated financial accounts." The hatred in her eyes was pure and concentrated, the look of someone who blamed everyone but herself for her downfall. "This isn't over," she said quietly, her words meant for Marcus alone. Marcus smiled back at her, the same cold smile he'd worn when testifying against corrupt executives. "You're absolutely right, Karen. It's not over. It's just getting started." Tom Bradley, looking shell-shocked, called for an emergency election to replace Karen as president. Linda Walsh, the secretary, began taking names of residents who wanted to file formal complaints, but Marcus wasn't finished. "Before we start talking about new elections," he said, his voice carrying over the crowd, "I think we need to address the elephant in the room. Margaret Foster, you're the treasurer. You sign off on all financial expenditures. You're telling us you never noticed that service contracts were inflated by 300%? Margaret Foster, a thin woman in her 60s, stood shakily. Marcus, I trusted Karen. She presented the invoices. I signed the checks. You never thought to question why our landscaping costs were triple what they should be. You never wondered why we were paying for pool maintenance when half the pools in the community don't exist anymore. I don't have a financial background, Karen said. The costs were in line with industry standards. Marcus studied her face carefully. After 15 years of investigating financial crimes, he'd developed a sixth sense for when someone was lying, versus when they were simply incompetent. Margaret Foster was incompetent. Margaret, he said more gently, I believe you, but incompetence isn't an excuse when people's life savings are at stake. You're going to need to resign. Now, wait just a minute, Tom Bradley interjected. We can't just start demanding resignations without proper procedures. Tom, Marcus interrupted. How long have you been vice president? For years, and you never once asked to see detailed financial records. Never wondered why our community had budget surpluses that kept disappearing. I wasn't involved in day-to-day financial management. That was Karen's responsibility. And when residents started complaining about fraudulent assessments, what did you do? Marcus nodded slowly. So you abdicated your fiduciary responsibility and allowed a criminal to operate unchecked for years. The room was watching this exchange like a tennis match. In a vacuum sheet had enablers, people who'd chosen willful ignorance over their duties to the community. Here's what's going to happen, Marcus announced. We're going to have a complete financial audit of the past 5 years. Was victimized. Janet Rodriguez stood up. Marcus, that's going to cost a fortune. We can't afford professional auditors. Marcus smiled. We don't need to hire auditors. We have something better. He looked around the room, making eye contact with dozens of his neighbors. We have a community full of people who've been robbed, who are angry, and who want justice, and we have the professional skills to get it. Marcus pointed to different sections of the room. Bill Henderson, you're a retired CPA. Dorothy Patterson's son is a lawyer. Janet Rodriguez used to work in banking. Marcus could see it happening. Residents who'd felt powerless and victimized were beginning to see themselves as a force for justice. We're going to form a committee, Marcus continued. We're going to investigate every aspect of Karen's operation. We're going to track down every stolen dollar and make sure it gets returned to this community. And we're going to make sure this never happens again. An elderly man in the back row raised his hand. What about the other communities? You said 17 HOAs were affected. Marcus nodded. I've already started reaching out to residents in those communities. We're going to coordinate with all of them. Karen Mitchell is going to face justice not just here, but everywhere she operated. What about getting our money back? Someone called out. Asset foe.